We welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. This is a special edition of Arise Xchange as part of our year-end 2020 programming here on Arise News Channel. I am Bosun Omofaye. Taking stocks of the outgoing year 2020 has revealed a few things. First, there was hardly any of the key challenges facing the Nigerian business community from the previous year 2019 that were alleviated or removed in the outgoing year 2020. In fact, the coronavirus pandemic and Endsars Protests turn out to have compounded some of the major issues in the business environment. Now, this is a two-part conversation with the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Muda Yusuf. 2 days ago, the Chamber released a 31-page report that reviews the year 2020 and presents a robust outlook on the incoming year 2021. Now, let's get started with the momentous year 2020 as we welcome the LCCI Chief, Muda Yusuf. Good evening and thanks for making it on the show tonight.
Thank you very much. Good evening to you and good evening to our viewers.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. What are the top three business headlines for you in the outgoing year 2020 and why?
Well, the three key factors or variables that really impacted on the business environment. First will be the COVID-19 pandemic because of the disruptions that it created, both at the macroeconomic level and at the enterprise level. It affected quite a lot of businesses, as you know. It affected the macroeconomic fundamentals of the economy. And it affected practically all sectors of the economy and at all levels of business. So the number one source of shock in the business environment this year is the COVID-19 pandemic. The second will be the liquidity crisis in the foreign exchange market. Because the economy is largely import dependent, both at the level of those who market finished goods and even for those who are manufacturers, the foreign exchange factor is a very big factor in the equation of business in Nigeria. So the crisis that we had in the foreign exchange market, namely in terms of scarcity, in terms of the uncertainty about the policy environment, in terms of the risk that all of these things portends for business, the foreign exchange liquidity crisis was also a major factor that shook the business environment in 2020. The third will be the security situation, and also related to that is the Endsars. The security situation took a much frightening dimension. The situation further deteriorated this year, and it's even more frightening because it seems we don't even have a clue as to how exactly to tackle the situation. So in many parts of the country, security has become a major factor, and that also is taking its toll on businesses. And if I may add the fourth one, is the ports and the customs. The situation at our ports was very, very bad in the outgoing year. It created a lot of hardship, a lot of frustration for businesses across all sectors of the economy, both from the point of view of the facilities at the ports, the access to the ports, and the documentation with the customs and other agencies at the ports. These were major sources of frustration, of disruptions in 2020.
So, Mr. Director General, aside COVID-19, internal insecurity had been an issue before 2020, as well as the FX risks and the problem with the clearance of goods at the ports, as well as getting to the ports with goods meant to be exported. So, do you think any of these downside risks to the business environment in 2020 were resolved? Were they ameliorated? Or were they in any way compounded by COVID-19?
Well, I wouldn't say they were ameliorated. If anything, I think the situation even worsened. Because if you look at all the key things that I've mentioned, there has been no significant improvement. Whether you are talking about issues of security, the situation with the ports, the external factor, of course, the COVID thing, which is an exogenous factor. We cannot attribute that squarely to the government of the day. But the policy responses to even the COVID outcomes is something that we probably could have done differently in order to reduce the shocks on the system, and it's to make the system much more flexible in dealing with the outcomes of the COVID.
How do you mean, Mr. Director General, Mr. Yusuf, how do you mean it could have been done differently? COVID-19, of course, looks like the poster boy of bad news in 2020. But do you think the impact of this on small businesses from a policy response point of view, fiscal policy or monetary policy point of view, would have been different?
Well, when I say it could have been done differently, you know, the COVID situation created some macroeconomic issues, particularly around the inflow of foreign exchange. And when we are faced with a situation of scarcity, the approach or the model that we use in dealing with the scarcity situation could make a whole lot of difference. The approach that we have adopted to use is the approach of administrative allocation of foreign exchange, which has been fraught with all manner of challenges, issues, and all of that, as you know. So that is one thing that I think we probably have done differently to reduce the uncertainties and the risk in the environment. Of course, just as I said, it's an exogenous variable, but policy responses can also make a whole lot of difference. And we could also do a lot more even around our trade policy. I'm talking about how we manage the tariff issues, what we need to hike, areas in which we need to hike the tariffs, areas in which we need to reduce the tariffs, so that all the shocks and the pains on both business and citizens will be much less. But if you come with an attitude that you want to generate revenue from all the imports, irrespective of the damage that is doing to the welfare of the people and the damage to the business community, then we may be adopting a wrong approach. So this is what I mean about the policy responses to the situation. If the policy responses were much better, the shocks on the system will not have been as severe as it has been.
One unusual item on your list in the report was the economic impact of Endsars protests. What are the lessons from that development moving forward?
Well, the lessons of the Endsars, first, was about engagement. Because democracy is about the people. It's the government of the people, by the people, for the people. That is the elementary definition of democracy. And the import of that is inclusion in whatever we do. It's engagement. It's about feedback to know what the impact of policies have been, what the impacts of the activities of the state institutions have been. Now, this regular feedback and engagement has a way of stabilizing the social environment. But if there is a disconnection between those who are running the government and the people, you have the kind of problem that we have. You have a situation where things now degenerate to a point that there is pent-up anger and all of that. And once there was a little trigger, you see the kind of implosion that we had. So that is one lesson. The second lesson is also about strategy in terms of protest, because there are also lessons to be learned by the promoters of the Endsars. There is no way you engage in a protest without leaving a window for engagement, leaving a window for dialogue. You know, if you have that, perhaps you'll have achieved a lot more with the protests than what happened with the Endsars. Because the protesters or the organizers of the protests also have some lessons to learn. You don't organize a protest and you say that there is no leader. It's a leaderless model. If there is no leader, then who gives the direction? I think that, again, is a lesson that we need to learn about issues of protest. Then there's also the lesson about unemployment. What the Endsars protest also showed was the degree of discontent, the degree of poverty in the land, and the level of unemployment that we have. So these are very critical social indicators that should signal how serious the social situation is. And the need for us as a people, as a government, to do something to address the social issues.
Your report, the report published by LCCI, says that the medium and small enterprises suffered about 2.7 billion naira loss or impact on that Endsars protest.
Yes, that was just for Lagos. I mean, if you take the national figure, it will be far, far much more than that. And the thing is that, first, the sectors in which the SMEs were predominant were the sectors that were most affected. You know, we are talking of those who are in the retail sector. A lot of them were severely affected by it. Those who are in buying and selling, retail, high street shops, and so on and so forth. And above all, many of them were also not insured, because the culture of insurance is still not particularly deep enough in our society. So the outcome of the Endsars and the destructions and the lootings that took place, many of them have not recovered as we speak. I know that there were proposals about giving them some soft loans and all of that, but again, that is starting from scratch. If you take the loan, you have to repay. It's not a grant. So somebody whose total inventory and assets and stocks and properties have been destroyed, it will be difficult for such a person to come back on his feet or on her feet. So they were the most vulnerable, and they were so highly affected because it was easy for the protesters or the hoodlums or all these people that hijacked the protests to reach this target people.
So just one question, one quick question to wrap up this segment before we take a break. What about the federal government's intervention on social programs for COVID-19? This administration also set up new modular refineries and flagged off the Lagos-Ibadan rail line. Do you think these are game changers for the business environment?
No, not exactly. Of course, they are symbolic, positively so. But in terms of being game changers, not exactly.
Let's chat to some of these forward-looking issues. When we come back after the break, Mr. Director General, stand by, everyone, and stand by as well. We appreciate your time. We'll continue this into more forward-looking into 2021 when we come back. You're watching Arise Exchange. Economic discourse globally and locally will center on recovery in the year 2021, and that was according to the latest LCCI Business Review report. That report went on to say that Nigeria's recovery prospects depend significantly on the direction of the global energy market. But while the economy will likely exit recession in the second quarter of 2021, the pace of recovery is expected to be sluggish and fragile within the region of 1%. The Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry says this position is reinforced by the fact that Nigeria's exit from recession in the second quarter of 2017 was lifted by the rebound in global oil price and stability in oil-producing region rather than any significant fiscal policy actions. Let's get a sense of what lies ahead as we dig further into the new report with our guest, Muda Yusuf, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you. We appreciate your standing by. Now, your report, the outlook in your report on 2021 seems generally bleak. Why is that so?
Well, first, as a business organization, as a private sector organization, we need to also manage expectations in order to minimize subsequent shocks when expectations are not met. All the key drivers of economic performance or business performance are some of which I've outlined in the course of our conversation. There is nothing on the horizon to indicate that there is going to be a major change in these variables or in this parameter. Look at the structural issues, which is one of the biggest challenges that the economy is facing today. Look at the issue with our energy, cost of energy, the cost of transportation, the state of the roads, the state of the ports, the documentation, the processes at the ports. There is nothing on the horizon to indicate that there will be a significant change in the near term. And we are talking now about 2021. So we can hold these variables or these factors, we can hold them constant when we are planning our strategy.
So I want to ask you very quickly, if you permit me to cut in respectfully there. Part of what the business environment for 2021 in that report was that no quick fixes for structural issues. So if there are no quick fixes to the structural issues we know, then how do we fix them and how quickly do you think we can fix them, even if we take them one after the other?
Well, the government is doing its best to fix them, but you need to just take a look at the budget to see how quickly we can get something concrete from the efforts of government. What is the percentage of the budget that is committed to infrastructure? I'm not sure, it's up to 15%. So how far can that take us? Given the huge infrastructure deficit that we have. The alternative is to get the private sector to fill some of these gaps. But these gaps are possibly even too big for the private sector to fill. When you take into account the capacity of the private sector, when you take into account even the risk environment for such huge private capital to come into the infrastructure space. So the prospects of even getting the private sector to fill these gaps, given the context in which we are running the economy, the prospects are not there. So that is why we feel that in the short term, we are talking about 2021, it's not likely that we see any remarkable improvement in some of these structural issues. So that is why we said that there are no quick fixes. So as a business, we need to construct our business model in a way that we hold some of these factors constant. So that we can plan well, we can know that these are some of the realities that we have to live with in 2021.
So let me ask you, let me quickly ask you about one of the biggest headache of the business environment in Nigeria is in relation to the clearance of goods at the ports and all of that. So do you have any new ideas, as it were, that you think could be deployed to resolve this problem, this issue?
Well, we must have the political will to undertake some major institutional reforms, especially around the Nigeria Customs Service. If we continue to manage the customs the way we manage it today, it will be difficult to get this economy to achieve what we intend to achieve. Because the whole orientation of the customs is about revenue. And unfortunately, their contribution to revenue, I'm not sure it's up to 15% or 10%. Whereas the challenges that they pose to investment and to investors is so huge. If you look at all the revenue agencies, I think customs perhaps is the biggest headache of the business community. So there has to be a total reorientation. There has to be a reform of the Nigeria Customs Service. That is the institutional aspect of the port or cargo clearance issue. Then there is also the infrastructure aspect in terms of the facilities that we have at the ports. There's also the issue of access roads to the ports. Happily, at least the current government is constructing the rail system to link the port directly. That, I think, may ease some of these challenges. But there are also infrastructure issues. There are issues of the access roads. There are also the issues of reluctance to apply technology. Because for some reasons, there have been a whole lot of reluctance to apply technology to reduce human interface at the ports or along all these cargo clearing processes. We have been talking about the single window for several years. As we speak, it is still not yet fully operational. As we speak, we are still checking cargo, examining cargo manually. I mean, this is unheard of. In this day and age, every cargo that comes to our ports are being examined manually. How efficient can that be? And this has been like that for a few years. I mean, using scanners is not rocket science. So the efficiency at the ports we need to deal with, both at the institutional level and at the level of ensuring that we have proper infrastructure, then also at the level of dispute resolution. One of the biggest problems we have with the Nigeria Customs Service is the resolution of disputes. Each time a dispute arises between the importers or manufacturers and the Customs Service, there is no credible platform to ensure that these disputes are resolved fairly and equitably. You have to take your dispute complaints back to the same customs officials. So the customs is the accuser, the customs is the judge. How can you get fairness from that?
I want us to touch on this important point before we wrap up this conversation, which has been an interesting for us. Your report says most SMEs will struggle to survive in 2021, and that surely scares me.
Well, SMEs generally have very little capacity to absorb shocks. Anytime there's a major shock, either from the regulatory side, from the institutional side, or from the macroeconomic perspective, they are very vulnerable because they don't have the capacity to stand up to these shocks. They don't have the buffers. So if you have a situation where the policies are not too friendly, where the macroeconomic environment is still very volatile, where we have weak purchasing power, where you have security issues. I mean, see what has been happening to the farmers in the northern part of the country. These are micro enterprises. What is their fate as we speak?
Mr. Director General.
So they are very vulnerable. Mr. Director General, and if the environment remains very challenging, then they will be the first casualties.
I want you to give me one very quickly. Mr. Director General, give me at least one silver lining in the economy in 2021.
Well, the silver lining is that our economy is big. We have a big market. And for those of us that are creative enough, that are innovative enough, to walk around some of these challenges, because there's always a way out.
Okay, so size is going to be a silver lining for Nigeria in 2021 moving forward. We thank you so much for your time. Director General, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce.